Welcome to this edition of the Head-to-Head Podcast. I'm your host, Cam McKinney. This is episode number 67 of the podcast. In this edition of the podcast, I'm going to be talking about the lack of playoff success for Billy Beane and the Oakland A's. They have won 97 games each of the past two seasons, but have lost in the pivotal one-game wildcard round in the playoffs, and they have not advanced in the playoffs since 1992. The Oakland A's have not won a playoff series under Billy Beane. What is the reason for this? I think the Oakland A's have had one of the strangest existence as a baseball franchise. They were once a powerhouse franchise in the early days of baseball before any of us could remember, with Jimmy Fox and all those guys. And then they kind of reemerged in the 70s with Reggie Jackson and Raleigh Fingers. And then in the late 80s, they went to 3 straight World Series with the likes of Jose Canseco and Mark McGwire, who we all know were some of the most ridiculous cheaters of our day. And then in the early 2000s, they were kind of shut out of the powerhouse level because big market teams started to steal away players via free agency in the Oakland A's, although in the history of baseball, they are a powerhouse, but outside in the real world, they are not in the same realm as the Red Sox, the Yankees, the Cubs, even the St. Louis Cardinals. They are one of the older franchises who are not thought of as that pristine group because they don't bring in the money that those other teams do. They're not owned by the John Henrys of the world or the Steinbrenners. They're not owned by billionaires. They have become a small market team. They are the only original powerhouse team that, in my estimation, is not a big market franchise. All of those other original classic baseball teams, the Red Sox, the Yankees, the Cubs, and the Cardinals, are now big market, $100 million payroll type of teams. The Oakland A's are not. They're playing under a different realm, and I find that to be the most interesting thing about them. This year, they won 97 games with the likes of Matt Chapman, who is one of the best defense and offensive third basemen, Matt Olson, Marcus Semien. The 3 of those players hit 30 home runs for the Oakland A's, yet the average fan who's not a baseball follower do not even know who those people are. Chris Davis, who is a walking 40 home run machine. Ramon Laureano, who is as good as Jackie Bradley defensively and way better offensively than Bradley. And then they have closer Liam Hendricks. Even this Oakland A's team this year that won 97 ball games, most of America do not know who those players are. Most people do not know who Matt Chapman, Matt Olson, or Marcus Semien is. Marcus Semien once led the American League in errors, and this year now he's an MVP candidate by most people's metrics. Going into this season, I didn't even know who Liam Hendricks was. He became an all-star closer for Oakland. Billy Beane is a master of developing these players, even if they don't become household names. Chris Davis, I didn't even really know who he was before he started hitting 40 bombs. Marcus Semien was making so many errors. Matt Olson and Matt Chapman are the 2 best players on the Oakland A's. He is clearly a master of scouting and finding players, even though he is not allowed to make the same mistakes as those other franchises are. I think whenever the Oakland A's lose in the playoffs, the first thought people have is, what's the big deal with Billy Beane? I've heard this a lot this week. What's the deal? Would you want Billy Beane to be the general manager of the team you root for? And in my instance, it's the Boston Red Sox. And I absolutely would love Billy Beane to be the general manager, because look at the prospects, look at the talent he's developed under the Oakland A's. Here's some of the guys he's had, even though he hasn't been able to hold on to them. Sonny Gray, one of the best pitchers of his era at one point. Sonny Gray was really good at one point and looked like to be a Cy Young contender, and he had a really good year with Cincinnati. He just couldn't hang in the big market New York. That's not the biggest diss ever. There are plenty good pitchers who can't pitch in New York. Then Beane acquires Yoenis Cespedes, Josh Reddick, Jed Lowry, Josh Donaldson, and Andrew Bailey. Let's think about those names for a minute. Yoenis Cespedes had a World Series heroic moments for the New York Mets. Josh Donaldson went to the Blue Jays, and they become instant contenders. Josh Reddick is now on the Astros, one of the best teams in baseball. Andrew Bailey went on to pitch for the Red Sox and Yankees at one point. All of those guys have basically had success elsewhere. And Jed Lowry had a 100 RBI season for the Oakland A's last year, but the Oakland A's were not able to hold on to him basically due to financial issues. The biggest issue with the Oakland A's is they have acquired all these talents. They've had different groups of players have success. Again, the Josh Donaldson Oakland A's went to the wildcard games. One year they acquired John Lester. They are not able to keep their players. And one of the biggest things in baseball is being able to keep star players through their prime. Josh Donaldson was a star with Oakland. He became a superstar somewhere else. Yoenis Cespedes was a star in Oakland. He became a superstar somewhere else. Sonny Gray, again, he had his struggles in Oakland, but they couldn't keep him to fix his issues because they couldn't afford him. Josh Reddick had some really good seasons in Oakland. He became a World Series hero with the Astros. Jed Lowry comes off a 100 RBI season, and this year the Oakland A's had to replace him with a .219 hitter in the form of Jurgensen Profar. These are issues that other baseball teams don't have to deal with. The Red Sox do not have to replace a guy who has a 100 RBI season because they can't afford him. The Oakland A's had to go out and get Jurgensen Profar to replace Jed Lowry. So even though last year they won 97 games, this year they won 97 games, they weren't even able to keep Jed Lowry because it was too much money. That is the issue. With success of their teams, they're not able to keep their players for long periods of time and build success. Think about that core that was broken up. At one point, they had Sonny Gray, Yoenis Cespedes, Josh Lowry, Josh Reddick, Jed Lowry, Josh Donaldson, and Andrew Bailey all on the same baseball team. If that were any other baseball team, if that were the St. Louis Cardinals, those group of players would be together for a decade or so. And because of that, they're watching Josh Donaldson play for the Braves, Josh Reddick on the Astros, Sonny Gray's on the Reds, Yoenis Cespedes is on the Mets, Andrew Bailey's out of baseball though, so they got that one right. But still, think of all those players that could still be helping out the Oakland A's that they had to let go in their prime because they could not afford them. Billy Beane has to rebuild like every 2 years, while the other general managers like Brian Cashman and Theo Epstein get to make colossal mistakes. Theo Epstein giving that money to Jason Hayward. He's a really good defensive player. I like Jason Hayward, but his contract has not lived up to the hype. Billy Beane does not get the luxury to be able to give out a bad contract. He doesn't have that luxury. He has to hit on the player and hopes that player stays with them. Chris Davis could have left the Oakland A's. They were lucky he took a 2-year deal to stay with the Oakland A's. They are probably going to lose Matt Chapman and Matt Olson and Marcus Semien because they can't afford all three of them. I bet they'll keep one of them, but I'm 100% positive the Oakland A's will not be able to keep all three of those players like some of those other teams would. That's the difference between the Cubs and the A's. If the Cubs want to, the Cubs can keep Chris Bryant. The Cubs can keep Kyle Schwarber. The Cubs can keep Anthony Rizzo for as long as they want. The Oakland A's do not have that luxury. Brian Cashman can give out bad contracts. Brian Cashman gave out one of the worst contracts of all time to Jacoby Ellsbury, and we don't even blink an eye, and they're still winning 105 games because he's allowed to give out that contract and then give out 1 million more contracts. Billy Beane does not have that luxury to do what he wants with money. He has to play like he's going to Walmart. He has to build a team out of not a lot of money when it comes to baseball these days. He is competing against teams like the Red Sox, Yankees, Cubs, Dodgers, who have the biggest payrolls in baseball, and he is still building 97-win teams. So yeah, I kind of think Billy Beane is a bit of a baseball genius. And how about every time he breaks up one of those teams, like he broke up the Josh Donaldson team, everyone is like, oh, poor Oakland A's, they were going to have a really good run. They should have kept all those players together. But he is smart enough to, on the fly, rebuild really fast success. And in the next couple of years, he has Matt Chapman, Matt Olson, Marcus Semien, Chris Davis, Ramon Laureano, and Liam Hendricks. I don't think there's another person in baseball who could have rebuilt on the fly that much and get back to the wild card game within the last few years like he has, and won 97 games in back-to-back years. Again, I don't think there are a lot of teams that can do that, to be able to do it time and time again. You can have a rebuild once and so often, but Billy Beane has been rebuilding this team on again, off again since 2000. He's lost to Jason Giambis. He's lost to Johnny Damons. He's lost to big market stars, to big market teams, and yet he's able to rebuild. Again, in some of those times, he had Barry Zito, Tim Hudson, and Mark Mulder at one point, and he lost all three of them to bigger markets. That is what the A's are facing that other teams don't quite have to go through. Again, the Red Sox will occasionally lose a big-time free agent to the Yankees or some other big-market team, but then the next few years they can go out and spend that money. Billy Beane does not have the luxury to spend money like he's a gambling addict. He doesn't. He is really playing on a payroll that he has to keep to a certain amount. It's why they made a movie about him. It's why he has ultimate job security, because he is actually really good at his job. And I think one of the biggest issues I'm dealing with this question every time they lose in the playoffs, and it's like, oh, why can't Billy Beane win the big game? Why can't the Oakland A's win the big game? Because they never have the same team year after year after year. Again, last year, they won 97 games, and they had basically a different bullpen and a different player. Jed Lowry was on the team, and they had a different bullpen. Jerus Familia was on the Oakland A's. They were bullpenning it last year, and they basically had to reshuffle their team within a year, and they were still able to win 97 games. How many teams could lose a 100 RBI infielder on the fly after having success, not be able to afford him, lose him to the Mets, and then still be able to win 97 games? I think that's the magic here with Billy Beane, is he knows he's going to lose these players, and he's planning ahead to the point where he's going to lose them. I think Billy Beane is a realist, is what he is. He knows he is going to lose Matt Chapman because he cannot pay him. Matt Chapman is almost the American League version of Nolan Arenado, one of the best defensive third basemen I've ever seen. Matt Olson is a slugger. 3 players hit 30 home runs on the Oakland A's. Matt Chapman, Matt Olson, Marcus Semien. There's a chance Billy Beane knows he is probably going to lose all 3. I think Billy Beane is already planning his next team after this. Chris Davis, he's probably going to lose him at some point, probably because of age. Ramon Laureano looks like he could be the next guy after that. He'll build a team around Ramon Laureano. Don't be surprised if that's the guy Billy Beane says we're going to build the next team around. And then Liam Hendricks, he finds out of nowhere to be his closer. He found Chad Bradford. We all saw the movie where he found Chad Bradford. There's a reason a movie's been made about this guy. I know he hasn't been to an American League Championship Series. I know maybe we don't like it when I think some people are annoyed by Billy Beane because he's been declared a genius, and we don't really like it when people are declared a genius, especially when it comes to sports. Like, ooh, he's a genius. Like, ooh, he hasn't won anything, whatever. It doesn't mean anything. I think it means a lot because he's not playing in the same field as the Red Sox, Yankees, Cubs, or Dodgers. He's playing a very different game. He has to use his mind more so than those other people do. I'm sorry, he does. Theo Epstein doesn't have to think about Jed Lowry leaving his team, because Theo Epstein could have just thrown money to Jed Lowry and had a good night's sleep. Billy Beane had to think on the fly and say, get me Jurgensen Profar and we'll be the same team, I guess. He has to think about that, and he has to think about what the results are going to be. Because if this goes bad with Profar, guess what? They probably weren't going to make the playoffs. So I think there's more on the line for Billy Beane in general. Again, I really like Theo Epstein. I think he's the best baseball executive ever. I really like Brian Cashman. I think he's one of the best baseball executives ever. But they are not doing the same job that Billy Beane is doing. I would put him in that same realm as those two. I think he has a much difficult job. He has to rebuild on the fly. fly every 2 or 3 years, and he's been able to do it to the point where he's winning back-to-back seasons of 97 wins. Yes, he lost a wild card game twice, but it's better to be what he is than to be totally bad and irrelevant. He's also picked the right guys to be the managers of the Oakland A's. Bob Melvin has been the manager for the last 8 years or so, and Bob Melvin has won 2 Manager of the Years with the Oakland A's. He won Manager of the Year when he was at Diamondbacks. He's one of the best managers in baseball. But do you know why he's winning Manager of the Years? Because his teams are overachieving. The mere fact that he's winning Manager of the Years over the Alex Coras and the Aaron Boones and all that is because his team shouldn't be as good as they are. So to say, why aren't you winning the big one? What's going on? Why can't the Oakland A's overcome it all? Because their standards are not the same, because they're not playing the same game as the other organizations. They should not be held to the same standards as the Red Sox, Dodgers, Yankees, or Cubs. I'm sorry, they shouldn't, because baseball does not have a salary cap, and the Oakland A's cannot compete financially with any of those teams. And the fact that they're even in the wild card games themselves is a mere fact. A fact of the matter is, Billy Beane is a baseball genius, in my opinion, and that is why you should pay attention to him, and that's why other big market teams should definitely want Billy Beane as their general manager, because I think if he has money, he would know how to spend it wisely, because he's been doing it with a team that doesn't know that can't spend crazily. Like, Theo Epstein has never been the general manager of a team that can't spend. Billy Beane has. Brian Cashman has never been the general manager of a team that can't spend. Billy Beane has. Those other teams have the luxury of going to Matt Chapman early in his career and saying, here, take the money. Marcus Semien, take the money. Matt Olson, take the money. Chris Davis, take the money. Ramon Laureano, let's lock him up. Liam Hendricks, let's lock him up. Billy Beane does not have that luxury. Billy Beane has to plan ahead, and he has to be like, some years are going to be really good, some years are going to be bad. He has to have the ups and downs of it. And again, a lot of general managers don't have the 20-something years Billy Beane has been in charge of the Oakland A's. I get the criticism. Like, they haven't been to the American League Championship Series in 1992. They probably should have won at least one of the 3 wild card games that they've lost. I get it. You can criticize them for that, but you cannot say that you, baseball fans, you cannot realistically say through his time period with the Oakland A's that Billy Beane has a team that should have went to the World Series or that they were the best team in baseball. Even when they won that 20-something in a row, when Miguel Tejada was carrying them, when they had Tim Hudson, Barry Zito, or Mark Mulder, you never realistically thought they should win the big one. So yes, you can be somewhat disappointed that the Oakland A's can't win big games, and you can say that all you want. Oakland A's fans can say, well, we don't get to keep our guys, we don't win the big games, what's the point of all this? Those are realistic points that I can see people making. But at the end of the day, he is giving you the chance to compete. You won 97 games each of the past 2 years and went to one of the biggest games of the week. And it came to a game. Now, the game that we watched wasn't really that close, and Yandy Diaz, who hadn't played since July 22nd, hit 2 home runs off of you. Those moments can hurt. In the moment, you can say, wow, these Oakland A's keep getting the chance to compete, and they're not doing it. But at the end of the day, in a few years from now, you are going to see the likes of Yoenis Cespedes and Josh Donaldson on other teams having playoff success with other teams. If Billy Beane had got to keep Yoenis Cespedes and Josh Donaldson on the A's, I think it's realistic to expect they would have won a World Series if those guys were 27-28 on those teams. They lost Josh Donaldson, and then he went on to win an MVP. They lost Yoenis Cespedes, and he had his best years with the New York Mets. They lost Sonny Gray, and yeah, he hasn't been great, but they lost Josh Reddick, and he won a World Series. The fact that these guys are having a huge amounts of success elsewhere at later stages of their career, I mean, look at that Red Sox team that just won. So Mookie Betts and Xander Bogaerts won a few divisions in a row, and then they finally won the big one with Alex Cora as their manager. If this were the Oakland A's, those guys would be gone. They wouldn't have that much of a run to be able to lose those 3 division series in a row and then finally win the World Series. They would probably be broken up and not being able to play with each other in their prime. At the end of the day, I just don't think Billy Beane and the Oakland A's should be held to the same standards as the Red Sox, Yankees, Cubs, and Cardinals, who have the money to spend free-willing as they want. He just doesn't. Now, this year they had a $92 million payroll. That's better than most years. But again, he's not going to be able to sustain that because they don't have the ballpark, they don't have the fan base, they don't have the rich ownership that the Red Sox and Yankees have. They're just not going to be able to keep this group together. And I think if they were able to keep this group together and acquire starting pitching and have a better bullpen, they would be able to compete with the likes of the Astros, the Red Sox, the Yankees, the Cubs, whoever, the Dodgers. I think they would be more. But I think the fact that we look at them and we say, why aren't you winning the big games? I think we should be looking at them like, why are you even here? Because realistically, baseball has shoved them aside by not having a salary cap. Baseball has said, we welcome the Dodgers, we welcome the Red Sox, we welcome the Yankees, we welcome the Cardinals, we welcome anyone who has a big amount of money. The Phillies can just swoop in and steal Bryce Harper. And guess what? The Oakland A's did a lot better than the Philadelphia Phillies, than the San Diego Padres, who spent huge amounts of money on Manny Machado and Bryce Harper. The Oakland A's did better than those teams. We should be celebrating the Oakland A's by spending money wisely and doing it the right way. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, they can actually build a baseball team. And yes, this baseball team is probably going to be broken up. And it will probably be years and years before the Oakland A's are really competing in the American League. They can get to another wild card game next year, maybe. Who knows? Just being able to be at the dance, I think, is good enough for the Oakland A's. And I think we can have all these questions about, well, does Billy Beane really deserve a movie about him or whatever? I think he does, because I think he is playing a completely different game than those big market teams. And I think, in my mind, Billy Beane and the Oakland A's ultimately are winning. In my mind, they are relevant. We are talking about them. They are in the biggest game. They're in the wild card game. They are relevant. And to me, that's what matters most. I think ultimately we should stop asking the question, why can't the Oakland A's win the big game, and start celebrating the fact that they are even in the big games to begin with. Thanks for listening to this edition of the Head Dead Podcast. I'm Cam McKinney. There will be a new episode of the podcast every Monday on Apple Podcasts and iTunes. And hey, check out the Chatter Podcast Network, home of the Head Dead Podcast, and also my movie/TV podcast, Pop Culture Spotlight. Check that out. Check this out. And please rate, review, and subscribe.